The dust devils swirled through Paradise, Arizona territory. On the morning Rebecca, Vaughn stood at her husband's grave for the last time, her black mourning dress already fading to gray after 3 months of relentless sun, and made a silent vow that she would never again put her heart in the hands of any man who might leave her this broken. She was 24 years old and felt ancient. Thomas had been gone since February, kicked by a spooked horse in the town stable where he worked. One moment he was alive, joking with the blacksmith about the dance coming up that Saturday. The next, he was on the ground, blood pooling beneath his head, and no amount of praying or pleading with God had changed what happened next. The doctor said he never felt any pain, but Rebecca had felt enough for both of them in the months since. Paradise was a small town, barely 300 souls, perched in the desert valleys where miners and ranchers tried to scratch out their fortunes from unforgiving land. It was 1878, and the territory was still rough, still finding its footing between lawlessness and civilization. Rebecca had come here with Thomas 4 years ago, newlyweds full of hope and dreams about the life they would build together. Now she lived alone in the small house on the edge of town, taking in sewing and mending to keep herself fed. She turned from the cemetery, the iron gate creaking behind her, and walked back toward town. The May heat was already building, promising another scorching day. Her basket hung heavy on her arm, filled with shirts that needed buttons replaced and a dress that required hemming. Mrs. Patterson's daughter was getting married, and there was always work before a wedding. The main street of Paradise stretched before her, a wide dirt road flanked by wooden buildings that baked in the sun. The general store stood on one corner, the saloon on another. The church steeple rose white against the blue sky. It was familiar and foreign all at once, this town that had been home but now felt like just a place where she existed. Mrs. Vaughn. The voice was quiet, respectful. Rebecca stopped and turned to find Emmett Armstrong standing a few feet away, his hat in his hands. He was a cowboy who worked at the Double R Ranch about 5 miles outside town, tall and lean with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of creek water. She had seen him around Paradise since before Thomas died, always polite, always keeping his distance. He was maybe 26 or 27, though she had never asked. "Mr. Armstrong," she said, keeping her voice neutral. In the months since she had become a widow, several men had approached her with varying degrees of tact and timing. Some waited a respectable interval, others did not. She had turned them all away with increasing firmness. "I wanted to say I am sorry for your loss," Emmett said. His voice carried a slight Texas drawl, soft around the edges. "Thomas was a good man. I only spoke with him a few times, but he was always fair and honest." "Thank you," Rebecca said. She waited for whatever else he would say, for the inevitable suggestion that she might want company for supper, or a ride out to see the spring wildflowers, or any of the other thin excuses men used to court a woman. But Emmett just nodded, put his hat back on, and said, "I hope your day goes well, madam," before walking past her toward the livery stable. Rebecca stood there for a moment, surprised, then continued toward home. The house was small but sturdy, built from adobe and wood, with 2 rooms and a covered porch. Thomas had been so proud when they bought it. She pushed the memory away and went inside to start her work. The days folded into weeks, and summer descended on Paradise with its crushing heat. Rebecca fell into a rhythm of work and solitude. She sewed. She tended her small garden. She went to church on Sundays and sat in the same pew, alone now, where she and Thomas had sat together. She spoke to her neighbors but kept herself apart, building walls that felt necessary for survival. She saw Emmett Armstrong occasionally in town. He always tipped his hat, sometimes offered a quiet greeting, but never pushed for more. Once, when her arms were full of packages from the general store, he appeared beside her and asked if he could carry them home for her. She agreed because refusing would have been rude, and they walked in comfortable silence. At her door, he handed everything over, wished her well, and left. "That cowboy is sweet on you," her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, said one evening as they sat shelling peas on Rebecca's porch. Mrs. Chen was a Chinese woman whose husband ran the laundry, and she had become Rebecca's closest friend in paradise, someone who understood what it meant to be outside the easy circles of society. "He has been nothing but respectful," Rebecca said. "That is how you know, Mrs. Chen replied with a knowing smile. "The ones who truly care take their time." Rebecca did not want to think about it. She focused on her peas, on the simple task of splitting pods and collecting the small green spheres inside. Thinking beyond the next day, the next week, felt impossible. The future was a vast, empty space she could not bear to contemplate. August came with monsoon rains that turned the desert green and filled the dry washes with rushing water. Rebecca sat on her porch one evening, watching lightning fracture the purple sky, and let herself remember Thomas for the first time in weeks. Not the horror of his death, but the good parts. His laugh. The way he sang off key while he worked. How he brought her wildflowers for no reason except that they were pretty and he thought of her. The grief rose up fresh and fierce, and she wept there in the rain-washed darkness. Wept for everything she had lost and everything she would never have again. She did not hear the rider approach until the horse was nearly at her gate. Emmett Armstrong sat his mount easily, rain dripping from his hat brim. "Mrs. Vaughn, are you all right?" She wiped at her face, embarrassed. "I am fine, Mr. Armstrong." He dismounted, ground-tied his horse, and came to the edge of the porch. The rain had soaked through his shirt. "You do not look fine, if you will pardon me saying so." "It is not your concern," she said, but without heat. "Maybe not," he agreed, "but I am concerned anyway." He paused, then asked, "Would you like some company? I will sit right here on the steps and not say a word if you prefer. Sometimes it helps to not be alone." Rebecca knew she should send him away. She knew what people would say if anyone saw a man at her house after dark. But the loneliness was suddenly so enormous, so crushing, that she could not bear it. "You can come up out of the rain," she said quietly, "but you should know I have no interest in courting or remarrying. I loved my husband, and I cannot imagine ever feeling that way about anyone else." Emmett climbed the 2 steps and settled himself in the chair farthest from hers, maintaining a proper distance. "I understand, madam. I lost someone myself a few years back. A girl I was going to marry. She took sick with fever and did not recover. I know that emptiness." They sat in silence for a long time, watching the storm, and Rebecca found that his presence did help. He did not try to fix her grief or tell her it would get better with time. He just sat with her in it, and that was oddly comforting. When the rain finally slowed, Emmett stood. "I should get back to the ranch, but if you ever need anything at all, you can send word. I mean that." "Why?" Rebecca asked. The question came out more bluntly than she intended. "Why do you care?" He met her eyes, his expression serious. "Because you deserve someone who cares. Because this world is hard enough without facing it entirely alone. And because from the moment I first saw you in church, laughing at something your husband whispered in your ear, I thought you had the most beautiful smile I had ever seen. I know that is not what you want to hear right now, and I am not asking for anything. But you asked why, and I believe in being honest." Before Rebecca could respond, he was down the steps and on his horse, riding off into the rainy darkness. She sat very still, her heart beating too fast. She did not know what to do with his confession, so she tucked it away and tried not to think about it. The autumn brought cooler weather and a different kind of ache. The anniversary of her wedding approached, and Rebecca found herself thinking about the year before, when Thomas was still alive, and they had celebrated with a picnic by the creek. She had worn her blue dress, and he had brought a bottle of wine they could not really afford, and they had toasted to forever. Forever had turned out to be so painfully short. She was walking home from the general store in late October when she heard shouting. Two men were arguing outside the saloon, both drunk, both armed. The smart thing would have been to cross the street to get out of the way, but Rebecca was still in the middle of the road when one of them drew his pistol. Everything happened very fast. Someone grabbed her around the waist and hauled her backward. A gunshot cracked through the air. She hit the ground hard with someone's body covering hers, and then there were more shouts and the sound of the sheriff's voice restoring order. "Are you hurt?" Emmett's voice was urgent in her ear. He was the one who had grabbed her, who had gotten her out of the line of fire. "I do not think so," Rebecca managed. She was shaking, adrenaline flooding her system. He helped her to her feet, his hands gentle but quick, checking for injuries. The sheriff had both drunk men in custody, their weapons confiscated. A few people had gathered to watch, but the excitement was already over. "Let me walk you home," Emmett said. This time Rebecca did not argue. Her legs felt unsteady and her heart was still racing. They walked in silence until they reached her porch, and then she turned to him. "Thank you," she said. "You might have saved my life." "I am just glad I was there," he replied. "Paradise is getting rougher. More miners coming through, more men looking for easy money. You should be careful." "I will be." She hesitated, then added, "Would you like to come in for coffee? It is the least I can offer after what you did." Something flickered in his eyes, hope maybe, but he kept his voice even. "That would be nice, thank you." Rebecca put on the coffee and they sat at her small kitchen table. In the close quarters of her house, she was more aware of him as a man, the breadth of his shoulders, the calluses on his hands, the way he moved with easy confidence. It made her uncomfortable, not because she was afraid of him, but because she was not. "How long have you been at the Double R?" she asked, needing to fill the silence with something safe. "About 2 years now. I worked ranches in Texas before that, but I was looking for a change. Arizona Territory seemed like a good place for a fresh start." "Is it? A good place?" He smiled slightly. "It has been for me. The work is honest, the boss is fair, and the land is beautiful in its own harsh way. I have grown fond of it. And paradise." "Paradise has its charms," he said, looking directly at her. Rebecca felt heat rise in her face and looked down at her coffee. "Mr. Armstrong, I told you I am not interested in courtship. I know, and I have respected that, have I not?" He leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Vaughn, I am not here under false pretenses. You offered me coffee and I accepted. That is all this is. But I am not going to pretend I do not care for you, because I do. I have from the start. And when you are ready, if you are ever ready, I would like the chance to court you properly. But until then, I am content to be your friend if you will let me." "I do not know if I will ever be ready," Rebecca said quietly. "That is all right," Emmett replied. "Some things are worth waiting for." He finished his coffee, thanked her for her hospitality, and left. Rebecca sat at her table for a long time afterward, thinking about his words, about the gentle patience in his eyes, about how strange it was to feel something other than grief stirring in her chest. Winter came to Paradise with cold nights and bright, sharp days. Rebecca continued her sewing, saved her money, and tried to build a life that felt like more than just surviving. She attended a church social in December and danced once, with the minister's son, and felt guilty afterward even though Thomas had been gone nearly a year. Emmett came to town every week or so, and he always found a reason to stop by her house. Sometimes he brought firewood. Sometimes he fixed things that needed repair, a loose board on the porch, a window that stuck. He never stayed long and never asked for anything in return. Rebecca began to look forward to his visits, though she would not have admitted it out loud. Christmas arrived, and the church held a service on Christmas Eve. Rebecca sat in her usual pew, alone but not quite as lonely as before. After the service, she found a small package on her doorstep, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Inside was a pair of fine leather gloves, soft and well-made, and a note in careful handwriting that said only, "For the cold mornings. E.A." She held the gloves for a long time, something warm and complicated unfolding in her heart. The new year, 1879, began with a cold snap that frosted the desert and left ice in the water barrels. Rebecca woke one morning to find her garden plants wilted and blackened, and she felt a disproportionate sadness over it. It seemed like everything beautiful eventually died. She was sitting on her porch, wrapped in a shawl and feeling melancholy, when Emmett rode up. He dismounted and came to the gate, his breath misting in the cold air. "Good morning, Mrs. Vaughn," he said. "Good morning, Mr. Armstrong." He glanced at the garden. "I am sorry about your plants. It was a hard frost." "They were just plants," Rebecca said, but her voice caught. Emmett stood there quietly, and then he said, "Would you take a walk with me? There is something I would like to show you." Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. She went inside to get her coat and the gloves he had given her, and when she came back out, he was waiting by his horse. They walked through town and out toward the hills, not speaking much, just moving through the cold morning together. The sun was rising, painting the desert in shades of gold and pink. After about 20 minutes, Emmett led her to a small valley sheltered between two rocky outcroppings. "Look," he said, pointing. The valley was full of wildflowers, delicate white blooms that had somehow survived the frost. They carpeted the ground, swaying slightly in the breeze, impossibly beautiful. "Desert chicory," Emmett said. "They are tough. They can handle the cold better than most plants. I thought you might like to see them." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. "They are lovely." "I know this has been a hard year for you," Emmett said quietly, "and I know you are still grieving. But I wanted you to see that beautiful things can survive, even when everything seems harsh and frozen." She looked at him, this patient, kind man who asked for nothing but gave so much, and something shifted inside her. It was not love, not yet, but it was the first crack in the wall around her heart. "Thank you," she said, "for this, for everything." He smiled and it reached his eyes. "You are welcome." They walked back to town slowly, and at her door, Rebecca did something impulsive. She stood on her toes and kissed his cheek, quick and chaste. "Thank you," she said again, and then she went inside before she could see his reaction. Through her window, she watched him stand there for a long moment, his hand touching the spot where her lips had been, before he walked away with a lightness in his step that had not been there before. The weeks that followed were a kind of slow thaw, both in the weather and in Rebecca's heart. Emmett continued his visits, and she began to invite him in more often. They talked about everything and nothing, his childhood in Texas, her family back east, the books they had read, the dreams they had once held. She learned that he wanted to own his own ranch someday, a small spread where he could raise good horses. He learned that she had always wanted to see the ocean, though she probably never would. In February, on the anniversary of Thomas's death, Rebecca went to the cemetery alone. She stood at the grave for a long time, and then she said out loud, "I will always love you. You were my first love, and that will never change. But I think it is time for me to live again. I think you would want that for me. I hope you would." The wind stirred the dry grass, and Rebecca chose to take it as an answer. March brought warm winds and the promise of spring. Rebecca found herself humming while she worked, something she had not done in over a year. Mrs. Chen noticed and said nothing, but her smile was knowing. One evening in early April, Emmett came to her door dressed more carefully than usual, his shirt clean and pressed, his hair still damp from washing. Rebecca felt her pulse quicken. "Mrs. Vaughn," he said, formal and nervous. "I know it has been just over a year since you lost your husband, and I do not want to rush you or presume anything. But I was wondering if you would do me the honor of allowing me to court you properly. I would like to take you to dinner, if you are willing." Rebecca had known this was coming, had felt it building between them for months. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately. But another part, the part still scared of loss and pain, hesitated. "Mr. Armstrong," she began, and saw his face start to fall. "Emmett," she corrected, using his first name for the first time. "I care for you, I do, but I am frightened. I lost Thomas so suddenly, and the thought of opening my heart again, of risking that kind of pain, it terrifies me." "I understand," Emmett said. "And I cannot promise that life will not bring more pain. None of us can. But I can promise that I will do everything in my power to build a good life with you, to cherish you and protect you and stand beside you through whatever comes. I know you loved your husband, and I am not asking you to forget him or to love me the same way. I am just asking for a chance." Rebecca looked at this good, patient man who had waited so long, who had shown her kindness without expecting anything in return, and she felt the last of her walls begin to crumble. "I am not ready," she said, and saw the hope dim in his eyes. "I am not ready yet, but I think I might be someday." "Would you be willing to wait a little longer?" The hope reignited. "I would wait as long as you need." "Ask me again," Rebecca said, "in a year. If you still want to court me then, ask me again and I will give you my answer." Emmett nodded slowly. "1 year, I will ask you again in 1 year." He left, and Rebecca stood on her porch watching him go, wondering if she was being wise or foolish, protecting herself or just prolonging the inevitable. The seasons turned. Spring became summer, summer became fall, and Rebecca found her life settling into something that felt almost like contentment. She still missed Thomas, probably always would, but the grief had softened into something she could carry without being crushed by it. Emmett kept his distance, though not completely. He still came to town, still tipped his hat when he saw her, still helped when she needed it. But he did not push, did not ask for more than she had said she could give. His patience was remarkable, and it made Rebecca care for him even more. In September, a traveling theater company came through Paradise and put on a performance of Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing in the town hall. Rebecca went with Mrs. Chen, and she was surprised to see Emmett there as well, sitting a few rows back. Their eyes met across the room and he smiled, and she felt a flutter in her chest that was both terrifying and exhilarating. After the performance, he approached her as people were filing out. "Did you enjoy it?" he asked. "Very much," Rebecca said. "I did not expect to see you here." "I would not have thought Shakespeare was to your taste." "I like a good story," Emmett said. "And I appreciate the idea that two people who seem wrong for each other can find their way to being right." He said it lightly, but Rebecca heard the deeper meaning. She felt Mrs. Chen's elbow in her ribs and ignored it. "It is a comedy," Rebecca said. "Real life is rarely so tidy." "Maybe not," Emmett agreed, "but I believe in happy endings anyway." Winter came again, 1879 turning toward 1880, and Rebecca realized with a start that it had been nearly 2 years since Thomas died. 2 years of grief and healing, of learning to be alone, of building a new version of herself. She was not the same woman who had stood at that grave and vowed never to love again. She was not sure who she was now, but she was beginning to find out. Christmas arrived, And this time Rebecca attended the church social and danced 3 times, twice with ranchers she barely knew and once with Emmett. His hand was warm through her dress, and he held her the perfect distance away, respectful but not cold. They did not speak while they danced, but when the music ended and he stepped back, he said, "Thank you, Rebecca," using her first name for the first time. "You are welcome, Emmett," she replied, and saw the joy flash across his face. January 1880 was cold and clear. Rebecca turned 26 and felt simultaneously young and ancient. She had lived through more grief than some people twice her age, but she also felt like she was just beginning to understand what it meant to truly live. February came, and with it the 2nd anniversary of Thomas's death. Rebecca went to the cemetery in the morning as she had the year before, but this time she brought flowers, bright yellow desert marigolds that she had grown herself in pots. "I am going to say yes," she told the gravestone. "When he asks me, I am going to say yes. I hope that is all right with you. I hope you are at peace, wherever you are, and I hope you understand that loving someone new does not mean I love you less." The wind was gentle that day, stirring her hair, and Rebecca felt a sense of release, as if Thomas himself was giving her permission to move forward. She did not see Emmett for a week, then 2, and she began to wonder if he had forgotten or changed his mind. It was March before he came to her door again, and when he did, he was carrying a bouquet of wildflowers and wearing the same nervous expression he had worn a year ago. "Mrs. Vaughn," he began, then corrected himself. "Rebecca, it has been a year, as you asked, and my feelings have not changed. If anything, they have grown stronger. Would you do me the honor of allowing me to court you?" Rebecca looked at him, this good man who had waited so patiently, who had shown her what it meant to truly care for someone without demanding anything in return, and she felt her heart open fully for the first time in 2 years. "Yes," she said, and watched joy transform his face. "Yes, Emmett, I would like that very much." He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for the entire year. "Truly, truly," Rebecca said, smiling. "Though I should warn you, I am terribly out of practice with courtship. You may have to be patient with me a little while longer." "I have been patient for 2 years," Emmett said, his voice rough with emotion. "I can manage a bit more." He stepped closer, and Rebecca thought he might kiss her, but instead he just took her hand and held it gently, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "Thank you," he said, "for giving me this chance. I will do everything I can to make you happy." "I know you will," Rebecca said, and realized she truly believed it. The courtship that followed was sweet and slow and exactly what Rebecca needed. Emmett took her to dinner at the hotel restaurant, where they ate steak and potatoes and talked until the servers started giving them pointed looks. He took her on rides out into the desert, showing her the secret places he had discovered in his time in Arizona, hidden springs and ancient rock formations and vistas that took her breath away. They went to church together on Sundays, sitting side by side in the pew, and Rebecca felt the whispers and stares of the town but found she did not care as much as she thought she would. Let them talk. She was happy, genuinely happy, for the first time since Thomas died. Emmett was different from Thomas in almost every way. Thomas had been spontaneous and loud, full of big gestures and grand plans. Emmett was quiet and steady, the kind of man who showed his love through actions rather than words. He fixed her fence without being asked. He brought her books from the traveling salesmen who passed through. He listened when she talked about her grief and her fears, and he never made her feel weak for having them. In May, they went on a picnic by the same creek where Rebecca and Thomas had celebrated their anniversary 3 years before. She had worried it would be painful, returning to that spot with someone new, but instead it felt like a kind of closure, a way of honoring the past while embracing the future. They sat on a blanket under the cottonwood trees, eating fried chicken and biscuits that Rebecca had made, and Emmett said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret it, saying yes to me?" Rebecca looked at him in surprise. "No, why would you think that?" "Because I know I am not your first love. I know there are probably times when you are with me and you think about him, about what you lost. I understand that, and I do not begrudge you those memories. But I wonder sometimes if you wish things were different." Rebecca set down her chicken and turned to face him fully. "Emmett, you are right that you are not my first love. Thomas was, and that will always be part of who I am. But that does not make what I feel for you any less real or any less important. You are not a replacement or a second choice. You are the man who saw me at my lowest and chose to wait, to be patient, to show me that it was possible to love again. I do not regret saying yes, not for a moment." He reached out and cupped her face gently. "I love you, Rebecca. I have loved you since the first time I saw you smile. I know it has not been very long since we started courting, and I am not asking for anything you are not ready to give, but I wanted you to know." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "I love you too," she said, and realized as she spoke the words that they were true. It was different from how she had loved Thomas, but it was just as deep, just as real. "I love you, Emmett Armstrong." He kissed her then, soft and gentle, and Rebecca kissed him back, tasting happiness and hope and the promise of a future she had not thought she would ever want again. The summer of 1880 was the happiest Rebecca could remember. She and Emmett were inseparable whenever his work at the ranch allowed. They talked about the future, carefully at first, and then with growing excitement. Emmett had saved enough money to buy a small piece of land on the outskirts of Paradise, and he had plans to build a house there, to start his own horse ranch. "I would like you to help me design it," he said one evening as they sat on her porch watching the sunset. "The house, I mean. I want it to be ours, not just mine." "Ours?" Rebecca's heart beat faster. Emmett turned to her, suddenly serious. "I know we have only been courting for a few months, but I have been thinking about this for 2 years. I want to marry you, Rebecca. I want to build a life with you, a home, a family if we are blessed with one, but I will not rush you. If you need more time, I will wait. I am good at waiting." Rebecca thought about everything that had brought her to this moment, all the grief and loss and slow healing. She thought about Thomas and the love they had shared, brief but beautiful. She thought about Emmett and his patience, his kindness, the way he made her feel safe and cherished and alive. "I do not need more time," she said quietly. "Yes, Emmett, I will marry you." The joy on his face was incandescent. He pulled her into his arms and held her close, and Rebecca felt something settle deep in her soul, a sense of rightness and peace. They were married in September, 2.5 years after Thomas's death, in the same church where Rebecca had mourned him. It felt right somehow, a closing of one circle and the opening of another. Mrs. Chen stood up with Rebecca, and one of Emmett's friends from the ranch stood up with him. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Emmett kissed Rebecca like she was the most precious thing in the world. The town threw them a party afterward, and people danced and ate and celebrated into the night. Rebecca wore a new dress, pale blue instead of white, and she danced with her husband and felt lighter than air. They spent their wedding night in the hotel, a luxury they could barely afford, but that felt important. Emmett was gentle and patient, and Rebecca felt herself falling even more deeply in love with him as he showed her tenderness and passion in equal measure. In the morning, they rode out to the land Emmett had bought, and he showed her where the house would go, where the barn would stand, where they would build the corrals for the horses. Rebecca looked at the empty, beautiful space and saw their future taking shape. "It is perfect," she said. "It will be," Emmett replied. "With you here, it will be perfect." They moved into Rebecca's small house while they worked on building the new one. Emmett kept his job at the Double R for now, saving every penny he could, and Rebecca continued her sewing. On weekends and evenings, they worked on their land together, clearing brush, planting fences, dreaming out loud about what it would become. In November, Rebecca realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but had been afraid to hope, afraid to say it out loud in case she was wrong. But when Dr. Morrison confirmed it, she felt a surge of joy so strong it almost knocked her over. She told Emmett that night when he came home from work. He was dirty and tired from a long day, but when she said, "I am going to have a baby," he let out a whoop of delight and picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests. "We are going to have a baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Rebecca, we are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" she asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said. He set her down gently, his hand going to her still flat stomach. "This is everything I have dreamed of. A wife I love, a baby on the way, a life we are building together. I am the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy was smooth and Rebecca bloomed with it. Emmett was attentive and protective, sometimes overly so, until she had to remind him that she was pregnant, not made of glass. They finished the house in March of 1881, just in time. A snug 3-room structure with a porch that faced the sunset and windows that let in the light. Moving day was chaotic and joyful, their few possessions looking small in the new space but promising. Emmett carried Rebecca over the threshold despite her protests, and that night they slept in their own house for the first time, listening to the wind whisper across the desert. The baby came in late April, a healthy boy with a strong set of lungs and his father's creek water eyes. They named him James after Emmett's father, and Rebecca thought her heart might burst from the fullness of it as she held her son for the first time. Emmett cried when he held James, tears running unashamedly down his weathered face. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect." "Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for this life, for this family." "Thank you for waiting for me," Rebecca said. "Thank you for being patient enough to let me heal." The first year of James's life was exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Emmett quit his job at the Double R and devoted himself full-time to building their ranch. It was hard work and the money was tight, but they managed. Rebecca sewed when she could between caring for James and helping with the ranch, and slowly, steadily, they built something real. By the time James was walking, they had 6 horses, including a beautiful mare that Emmett was training for breeding. The ranch was small but profitable enough to keep them fed and clothed with a little left over. Paradise continued to grow around them, more people arriving every month, the territory inching closer to statehood. On a warm evening in June of 1882, Rebecca stood on her porch with James on her hip, watching Emmett work one of the young horses in the corral. The sun was setting, painting everything gold, and she felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. Mrs. Chen had ridden out earlier that day and said something that stuck with Rebecca. "You have built a good life. You took your grief and turned it into something beautiful." Not everyone can do that. Rebecca had not known what to say, so she just smiled and offered more tea. But now, watching her husband and son, she thought about those words. She had built a good life, not in spite of her grief but through it. Thomas would always be part of her story, the first chapter of her adult life, but Emmett and James were the chapters she was writing now, and they were just as important, just as loved. "Mama, look." James pointed excitedly at his father, who was waving at them from the corral. Rebecca waved back and Emmett grinned, that slow smile she had come to love more than she thought possible. He tied off the horse and came striding toward the house, and when he reached the porch, he kissed her soundly, making James giggle. "What was that for?" Rebecca asked, laughing. "Do I need a reason to kiss my beautiful wife?" Emmett replied. But then he grew more serious. "I was just thinking about how different my life could have been if you had said no that first time, or if I had given up instead of waiting. I nearly did, you know. About 6 months in, I thought maybe I was being foolish, pining after a woman who would never want me." "What made you keep going?" Rebecca asked. "You did," Emmett said simply. "Every time I saw you, I saw a little more light in your eyes, a little more life. I wanted to be there when you were ready to live again. I wanted to be the man standing beside you." Rebecca set James down to play with the wooden horse Emmett had carved for him, and she wrapped her arms around her husband. "I am so glad you waited. I am so glad you gave me the time I needed." "I would have waited forever," Emmett said, holding her close. "You were worth waiting for." They stood there as the sun finished setting, James playing at their feet, the horses nickering softly in the corral, and Rebecca thought about how strange and beautiful life could be. How grief and joy could exist in the same heart. How endings could become beginnings. How love, real love, was patient enough to wait for exactly the right moment. Summer turned to fall, and Rebecca discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, and Dr. Morrison cautioned her to rest as much as possible. Emmett took over more of the household work, caring for James and managing the ranch, while Rebecca spent much of her time in bed, frustrated but obedient. The baby, another boy they named Samuel, came in February of 1883, smaller than James had been but healthy. Emmett was beside himself with joy. 2 sons now to help with the ranch, to carry on the Armstrong name. Rebecca watched him with their boys and fell in love with him all over again, seeing the gentle father he had become. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, hard but satisfying. The ranch grew slowly but surely. Emmett developed a reputation for training good horses, and people came from as far as Tucson to buy from him. Rebecca's sewing business continued, word of her skill spreading through the territory. In 1884, Paradise officially became a town instead of just a settlement, with a proper mayor and town council. Emmett was asked to serve on the council, and he accepted, wanting to help shape the future of the place they called home. Rebecca was proud of him, this man who had been just a cowboy when she met him, but who had grown into a respected member of the community. James started school in 1885, and Rebecca felt the bittersweet pang of watching her firstborn grow up. Samuel was walking now, getting into everything, and the house was loud and chaotic and full of life. Some days Rebecca was so tired she could barely stand, but she would not have traded it for anything. On a cool evening in October, after the boys were asleep, Rebecca and Emmett sat on their porch as they often did, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. They had been married 6 years now, and Rebecca felt like she had known him forever. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if things had been different?" she asked. "If Thomas had not died, if we had never met?" Emmett was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but not with any regret. I believe things happen the way they are meant to. I am sorry for what you lost, and I am sorry Thomas never got to see you become the woman you are now, the mother you are to our boys, but I cannot regret the path that brought you to me." "I used to feel guilty," Rebecca confessed, "for being happy with you, like I was betraying Thomas somehow. And now I think I understand that love is not a finite resource. I can love Thomas for who he was and what we had, and I can love you for who you are and what we have. They are different loves, but they are both real." Emmett reached over and took her hand. "You are a wise woman, Rebecca Armstrong," she laughed. "I do not know about wise, but I am learning. Every day I am learning." In the spring of 1886, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant for a third time. She was 32 now, and the pregnancy felt different, harder on her body. But when their daughter was born in December, tiny and perfect with a shock of dark hair, Rebecca wept with joy. They named her Grace, because she felt like a gift they had not dared to hope for. Emmett was impossibly gentle with his daughter, this tiny girl who had him wrapped around her finger from the moment she was born. James and Samuel, now 5 and 3, were fascinated by their baby sister, constantly wanting to help care for her. The late 1880s brought changes to Paradise and to Arizona Territory. More people, more businesses, more civilization creeping in to tame the wild edges. The Apache wars that had defined the territory for so long were coming to an end, and there was talk of statehood, though it would be years yet before it actually happened. The Armstrong ranch prospered. They had 20 horses now, and Emmett had hired a young man to help with the work. The house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, adding 2 more rooms and a larger kitchen. Rebecca had stopped taking in sewing except for special occasions, too busy with the children and the ranch. In 1889, James was 8, Samuel was 6, and Grace was 3. Rebecca looked at her children and marveled at how quickly time had passed. It felt like just yesterday she was a grieving widow standing at Thomas's grave, unable to imagine a future. Now here she was, surrounded by love and life and noise, happier than she had ever thought possible. One Sunday after church, Rebecca visited Thomas's grave for the first time in over a year. She brought Grace with her, this daughter he would never know, and stood looking at the weathered headstone. "This was my first husband," she told Grace, who was too young to really understand but who listened with solemn eyes. "He was a good man and I loved him very much, but he went to heaven before you were born." "Did he know, Daddy?" Grace asked. "No, sweetheart. I met your daddy after Thomas went to heaven." "Is Daddy going to go to heaven too?" Grace's eyes filled with worry, and Rebecca's heart clenched. "Not for a very long time," Rebecca said firmly. "Your daddy is strong and healthy, and he is going to be here to watch you grow up." It was a promise she could not really make, she knew. Life was uncertain, and tragedy could strike at any moment. But she chose to believe it anyway, chose to have faith in the future instead of living in fear of loss. Grace seemed satisfied with this answer and went back to picking wildflowers to put on the grave. Rebecca stood there a moment longer, feeling a sense of peace. She no longer needed to visit this place to remember Thomas. He lived in her memories, in the lessons his love had taught her, but he was not her present or her future. That belonged to Emmett and their children, to the life they were building together. The 1890s brought even more growth to Paradise. The railroad finally came through, connecting them to larger cities and bringing new opportunities for trade. Emmett began shipping his horses farther afield, and the ranch's reputation grew. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, able to provide for their children and save a little for the future. James showed an aptitude for working with horses, and Emmett began teaching him seriously, talking about how the ranch would be his someday. Samuel was more interested in books and learning, and Rebecca made sure he had access to all the education Paradise could offer. Grace was still young but showed signs of having her father's patience and her mother's determination. In the summer of 1892, Rebecca's mother came to visit from back east, the first time she had made the journey. She was shocked by the rough conditions compared to Boston, but she was also impressed by what her daughter had built. "I worried about you," she confessed one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Emmett play with the children. "After Thomas died, I thought you might never recover. And then you wrote about this cowboy who was waiting for you, and I thought you were rushing into something out of loneliness." "And now?" Rebecca asked. Her mother smiled. "Now I see that I was wrong. He is a good man and he loves you deeply. You have built something real here, Rebecca, something lasting." It meant more than Rebecca had expected to have her mother's approval. They had been so far apart for so long. Letters the only connection, and having her here, seeing her life, made everything feel more real somehow. The years continued to pass, marked by small moments and large ones. James's first solo horse training at 13. Samuel winning a school competition for his essay about Arizona history. Grace learning to ride almost before she could raid, fearless and laughing. Emmett's hair starting to gray at the temples. Rebecca finding lines around her own eyes when she looked in the mirror. Evidence of years spent squinting in the sun and laughing. In 1895, 17 years after Thomas's death and 15 years after Rebecca and Emmett's marriage, Paradise celebrated Arizona Territory's progress toward statehood with a big festival. The Armstrong family attended together, and Rebecca stood with Emmett's arm around her waist, watching their children run and play with their friends. "You remember when I asked you the second time," Emmett said softly, "when you finally said yes?" "Of course I remember," Rebecca replied. "It was March of 1880. You brought me wildflowers and looked like you might faint from nerves," he laughed. "I thought for sure you were going to say no again. I had prepared myself for it, told myself I would wait another year if that was what you needed." "Would you have," Rebecca asked, "truly waited another year?" "I would have waited 10 more if necessary," Emmett said seriously. "Some things, some people, are worth any amount of waiting." Rebecca leaned into him, watching James help Samuel with something, watching Grace dance with a group of other girls. "I am glad you did not have to wait that long. I am glad I was ready when I was." "No regrets?" Emmett asked, though his tone was light. "Not a single one," Rebecca said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Emmett and Rebecca sat on their porch as they had thousands of times before. The ranch stretched out before them, the horses moving quietly in the corrals, the desert vast and beautiful under the starlight. "I have been thinking," Emmett said, "about what happens next. James is almost ready to take over more of the ranch work. Samuel will probably want to go to college, and we should make sure he has that opportunity. Grace is still young, but she is going to need her own path too." "You are thinking about the future," Rebecca observed. "I am thinking about our future," Emmett corrected. "When the children are grown and on their own, I want to take you somewhere. Maybe to see that ocean you always dreamed about, maybe just traveling around, seeing the country. We have worked so hard for so long. I want us to have time just for each other again." Rebecca felt a surge of love for this man who still, after all these years, thought about her dreams and happiness. "That sounds wonderful," she said, "but we have time. We have all the time in the world." And in that moment, sitting beside the man who had waited 2 years to ask her again, who had shown her that love could be patient and kind and enduring, Rebecca believed it. They had time. They had built something that would last. They had created a life full of purpose and meaning and joy. The wind whispered across the desert, carrying the scent of sage and possibility, and Rebecca Vaughn Armstrong, who had once been a widow standing at a grave promising never to love again, smiled at her husband and knew she had found her happily ever after. Not despite the grief she had endured, but through it, transformed into something even more precious for having been earned through patience and time. 2 years he had waited to ask again. And every day since, he had proven himself worth that wait and more. That was the kind of love that lasted, the kind that built ranches and raised families and turned a broken heart into something whole and beautiful. That was the kind of love worth having. And Rebecca had found it, here in Paradise, Arizona territory, with a patient cowboy who had believed in happy endings enough for both of them. The years after 1895 brought continued change and growth to the Armstrong family, and to Paradise itself. James, now 16, had become an accomplished horse trainer in his own right, working alongside his father with a skill that made Emmett proud enough to burst. Samuel, 14 and bookish, had his sights set on attending university in California, something Rebecca and Emmett were determined to make happen despite the expense. Grace, at 10 years old, was a whirlwind of energy and determination, equally comfortable in the saddle or helping her mother with the household. The ranch had expanded to nearly 40 horses, and Emmett had hired 2 full-time hands to help manage the work. The original house had been added onto twice more, sprawling now to accommodate the growing family, and the occasional ranch hand who stayed in the bunkhouse Emmett had built behind the main structure. Rebecca was 41 now, with silver threading through her dark hair and a contentment that showed in the easy smile she wore most days. She still thought about Thomas sometimes, especially on quiet mornings when the light hit the desert in a certain way, but the memories were soft now, tinged with gratitude rather than grief. He had been her first love, the one who had taught her what it meant to open her heart. But Emmett was her great love, the one who had taught her what it meant to truly build a life with someone. In the spring of 1896, Samuel received acceptance to Stanford University in California, and the family celebrated with a special dinner. Rebecca felt the familiar bittersweet pang of watching her child prepare to leave home, but it was tempered by pride in the young man he had become. "Your father and I are so proud of you," she told Samuel that night as they sat on the porch, just the two of them. "You are going to do great things." "I will come back," Samuel said, hearing the worry beneath her words. "Maybe not to live, but I will always come back to visit. This is home. You and Dad and James and Grace, you are home." Rebecca hugged him tightly, this son who had never known Thomas, who only knew the stable, loving family they had built. "I know you will. And I want you to go to learn and grow and find your own path. That is what parents are supposed to want for their children." The summer Samuel left for California was harder than Rebecca expected. The house felt too quiet without his constant reading and questioning and thoughtful observations. But letters came regularly, full of excitement about his classes and his new experiences, and Rebecca took comfort in his happiness. James stepped into more responsibility at the ranch, essentially running it alongside Emmett now. At 17, he had his father's quiet strength and his mother's determination. Rebecca watched him work and saw the future of the ranch secure in his capable hands. Grace, meanwhile, was becoming a young woman with opinions and dreams of her own. She wanted to train horses like her father and brother, not to sew and keep house like her mother. Rebecca, remembering her own younger self and the limited choices women faced, encouraged her daughter's ambitions even as she made sure Grace learned practical skills too. "The world is changing," Emmett said one night when Rebecca expressed worry about Grace's future. "Maybe not as fast as we would like, but it is changing. Women are doing things now that they could not do when you were her age. Let her dream big. We will help her figure out how to make those dreams reality." It was one of the things Rebecca loved most about Emmett, his willingness to see people as individuals rather than fitting them into expected roles. He had never tried to make her into something she was not, and he extended that same respect to their daughter. In 1898, as the nation buzzed with news of the Spanish-American War, Paradise continued its steady growth. The town now boasted over 1,000 residents, 3 churches, 2 schools, and a hospital. The dirt streets of Rebecca's early years there had been replaced with gravel roads, and there was talk of eventually paving the main street. Samuel came home for the summer, changed by his 2 years away, more polished and educated but still fundamentally the same thoughtful young man. He brought stories of San Francisco and the ocean Rebecca had never seen, and he showed her photographs he had taken, the water stretching endlessly to the horizon. "We should go," Emmett said, studying the photographs. "Next year, when things slow down in the winter. We should take that trip we talked about." Rebecca looked at him in surprise. "You were serious about that?" "Of course I was serious. When have I ever not been serious about something I promised you?" Emmett smiled. "James can handle the ranch for a few weeks. Samuel will be on break and can help. It is time we saw some of the world beyond Paradise." The idea took root and grew. Rebecca had never been farther than Tucson in all her years in Arizona territory. The thought of seeing the ocean, of traveling to California with Emmett, filled her with an excitement she had not felt in years. They made the trip in January of 1899, traveling by train through the desert and into California, staying in hotels that felt impossibly fancy after years of ranch living. When Rebecca saw the Pacific Ocean for the first time, she stood on the beach and cried, overwhelmed by the vastness of it, the power and beauty. Emmett stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, and said nothing, just let her experience the moment. Later, as they walked along the shore, he said, "I am glad I got to see this with you. I am glad I got to be the one to give you this." "You have given me so much more than this," Rebecca said. "You have given me a life I never thought I would have again. You have given me happiness and love and a family. The ocean is beautiful, but it is just a small part of everything you have given me." They spent 2 weeks in California, seeing the sights, visiting Samuel at school, and enjoying time together without the demands of the ranch and children. It was like a second honeymoon, a reminder of who they were as a couple beyond their roles as parents and ranchers. When they returned to Paradise, Rebecca felt renewed, ready to embrace the next phase of their life. Grace was 13 now, on the cusp of young womanhood. James was 20, seriously courting a young woman from town named Sarah Mills. Samuel was thriving at Stanford, talking about staying in California after graduation to work for a law firm there. The new century arrived with celebration and speculation about what the future might hold. Rebecca was 45, Emmett was 48, and they had been married for nearly 20 years. The ranch was thriving, their children were healthy and happy, and Rebecca felt a deep sense of satisfaction with the life they had built. In the summer of 1900, James married Sarah in a beautiful ceremony at the church. Rebecca watched her firstborn pledge his life to another woman and felt the full weight of time passing. It seemed impossible that this confident young man was the same baby she had held in her arms 19 years ago. "We are getting old," she said to Emmett at the reception as they watched James and Sarah dance. "We are getting older," Emmett corrected, "but I do not mind. Every year with you is a gift." Sarah moved into the ranch house with them, and Rebecca found herself enjoying having another woman around. Sarah was sweet and hardworking, and she clearly adored James. Within a year, they announced Sarah was pregnant and Rebecca prepared to become a grandmother. The baby, a boy they named Thomas, arrived in March of 1901. Rebecca held her first grandchild and felt the circle of life complete in a way she had not expected. Thomas, named for the man she had first loved, born to the son she had made with the man she had learned to love. It felt right, a way of honoring the past while celebrating the future. Emmett was a doting grandfather, patient and playful with baby Thomas, in a way that made Rebecca fall in love with him all over again. She watched him rock the baby to sleep, singing old cowboy songs in his weathered voice, and thought about how lucky she was to have found this man, to have given him a chance after so much grief. Samuel graduated from Stanford in 1902 and took a position with a law firm in San Francisco. He came home to visit when he could, usually bringing stories of the city and gifts for his nephew. Grace was 16 now, beautiful and headstrong, still insisting she wanted to work with horses rather than find a husband. "Let her," Emmett counseled when Rebecca worried. "She is young yet. She has time to figure out what she wants." In 1903, Arizona Territory edged closer to statehood, and Emmett was more involved than ever in local politics, serving on various committees and councils. Rebecca was proud of the respect he commanded in Paradise. This man who had arrived as just another cowboy, but who had built something lasting through hard work and integrity. James and Sarah had a second child, a daughter named Rebecca, and the ranch house rang with the sounds of children once more. Grace, at 17, had become an accomplished rider and trainer, working alongside her father and brother with skill that impressed everyone who saw her. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm, the kind that comes with age and accomplishment. Rebecca tended her garden, helped with the grandchildren, and occasionally took in special sewing projects. Emmett managed the ranch with James, training horses and building the reputation of the Armstrong name even further. On a warm evening in May of 1905, 25 years after their wedding, Rebecca and Emmett sat on their porch watching the sunset. The ranch spread out before them, prosperous and peaceful. Their children were grown and thriving. Their grandchildren were healthy and happy. "You remember when you asked me the second time?" Rebecca asked, the same question from years ago. "Every detail," Emmett replied. "I was terrified you would say no again." "I almost did," Rebecca admitted. "Not because I did not care for you, but because I was so afraid of losing someone again, afraid of the pain. It seemed safer to stay alone." "What changed your mind?" Emmett had never asked this before. Rebecca thought carefully before answering. "I realized that the pain of staying closed off, of never letting myself love again, was worse than the risk of loss. You showed me that through your patience, through your willingness to wait without demanding anything. You proved that love could be gentle and steady, not just passionate and wild. And I learned that I was strong enough to survive whatever came, even if the worst happened again." "And has it been worth it?" Emmett asked. "Taking that risk?" Rebecca looked at him, this man who had waited 2 years to ask again, who had built a life with her brick by patient brick, who had loved her through grief and joy and everything in between. "It has been worth everything," she said. "Every moment of fear, every risk, every hard day. You were worth waiting for, and you were worth saying yes to. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Emmett took her hand, his grip still strong despite the years. "I love you, Rebecca Armstrong. I have loved you for 27 years, and I will love you for as many more as we are given." "I love you too," Rebecca said. "Thank you for being patient. Thank you for waiting." They sat together as the stars emerged, two people who had found each other through grief and patience, who had built something lasting in the harsh Arizona desert. The wind whispered across the land they had made home, carrying the sounds of horses and grandchildren and the promise of tomorrow. Rebecca thought about the woman she had been, standing at Thomas's grave and vowing never to love again. She had meant it then, truly believed her heart was too broken to ever heal. But Emmett had shown her differently. He had waited 2 years to ask again, and in doing so had given her the time and space she needed to become whole enough to love him properly. That patience, that willingness to wait, had made all the difference. It had allowed her to come to him freely, without pressure or obligation, to choose him with her whole heart rather than out of loneliness or desperation. And that choice had led to this, to 25 years of marriage, to children and grandchildren, to a ranch and a life and a love that had grown deeper with every passing year. Grace came out onto the porch, now 18 and beautiful in the twilight. "I am riding out to check the north fence," she announced. "I will be back before full dark." "Be careful," Rebecca called after her, watching her daughter stride toward the barn with confidence and purpose. "She is going to be just fine," Emmett said. "All of our children are." "We did good, Rebecca." "We did," she agreed. "We really did." As night fell over Paradise, Arizona territory, the Armstrong family settled in for another peaceful evening. James and Sarah put their children to bed in their wing of the house. Grace returned from her ride and came to sit with her parents, talking about a new training technique she wanted to try. Inside, the lamps glowed warm, casting light out into the darkness. And on the porch, Rebecca and Emmett sat hand in hand, two people who had found their way to each other through patience and grief, through time and trust, through a love that had proven itself worth waiting for. The widow who had refused to remarry had found happiness with the patient cowboy who had waited 2 years and asked again. And together, they had built a life more beautiful than either could have imagined. It was a story of second chances and patient hearts, of grief transformed into joy, of love that knew how to wait for exactly the right moment. And it was a story with a happy ending, the kind that comes not from easy beginnings but from the hard work of healing and building and choosing to love again, despite the risk. In Paradise, Arizona territory, in the spring of 1905, that love continued, steady and true, a testament to the power of patience and the resilience of the human heart. And it would continue for many years more, a love story written in the language of waiting, of second chances, of happiness earned through time and faith. The end had a beginning, and that beginning had required patience. But what grew from that patience was worth every moment of waiting, every day of hoping, every year of building. It was love in its truest form, the kind that endures.